Welcome to Kvetchfest. I'm Jen.
And I'm Debbie.
We're Jewish.
So we like to kvetch.
I like to complain.
And I like to discuss things.
I grew up with my mom talking about all sorts of stuff. So I thought it would be fun to bring her onto Kvetchfest so we can have more conversations about life, politics, and everything in between.
I'm a boomer.
And I'm a millennial.
Our different perspectives could lead to shared insights, differing opinions, and new realizations about the world, ourselves, and our relationship. Be part of our community as we explore more together in relationship as parent and child.
Complaining can be cathartic, so let's kvetch together. Hello, Kvetchers. Welcome to Kvetchfest. I'm Jen.
I'm Debbie.
And today we're going to talk about therapy, therapy. I don't know why I spelled it out. It just sounded fun. Where do we begin with therapy? I mean, it's such a stigmatized topic, but I started therapy in my adulthood. Well, gosh, I guess it's been a few times that I've started therapy now that I'm thinking about it. I guess I started when I was around 26, 27, and then that fell through, and then I started again at 30, and I've been going to therapy consistently since I was 30 years old, whether it was weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, which now it's monthly because it's very expensive and my insurance doesn't cover it. Womp womp, the United States. I really like therapy. I wish I could afford to go to, this is going to sound so ridiculous, but I just want to do everything. I just want to go get CBT therapy. Yeah, I want to do EMDR therapy. I did EMDR therapy in my 20s. I did about 4 sessions back then. And of course, I did therapy in my childhood too. It's a wild journey, therapy. There's so many modalities, and you have to click with your therapist. And if you don't click with your therapist, then therapy isn't going to therapy. You know, it's just not going to happen. So I've been to couples therapy. Yeah, I mean, yeah, dance there. I mean, I'm just listing off different therapies now. My goodness, that's boring.
We're giving background.
Yeah. The problem is with therapy. No, the issue I have with therapy sometimes is that I want my therapists to be my friends. And I know that then maybe that's not so great because
That's called transference.
Yeah, but also I'm like, oh, but you're also just a really cool person. Like, this was before they even knew that much about me. And I was like, oh, wow, we would be friends if you weren't my therapist, maybe, or you would maybe be just in my community. But I do think that's such an interesting thing is, yeah, I struggle with that sometimes with really enjoying my therapist as their own person and also as my therapist. And sometimes it would make me, I don't know if shy is the right word, but like comfortable sharing more because I think maybe if my therapist was just a different person, I wouldn't feel this way. So then it made me think, well, should I continue with this therapist if I feel that way? Or I don't know, Mom. I feel like there's a lot. I don't know if you've experienced that, but a lot of people in my life have experienced having crushes on their therapists or their therapist is too new and they don't click with them because of that, because they're not sure what they're doing yet. I could go on about that. But anyway, therapists do not equal your friend, of course, but I think you do really have to find someone that you do connect with and that gets you to a certain extent so that they can give you proper services or therapeutic tools or, because if you don't feel safe or comfortable with someone as your therapist, it's not going to go very far and you're not going to get out what you should from it.
Right. I agree with that.
Yeah. I went on a weird little.
I think that, I was going to ask you, because when I first started therapy, I didn't think about whether my therapist needed to be female or male. And that was most of the dynamic when I was growing up, or if they needed to be in my religious background. I didn't think, or younger, older, the same age. I didn't think about anything like any of that. I just
went.
Right. I was going to say either I just went or I was assigned a particular therapist. And so when I first started therapy when I was 17, I had a male therapist and an older guy. He was probably older than my dad at the time. So he was probably in his maybe late 40s. And I didn't have anything disparaging about him. I thought he kind of identified what was going on and gave me an action plan, which worked for me at the time. Then I didn't go again to therapy until I was in my 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, the therapist that I had in my 30s was actually your grandmother, Carolee's therapist.
Did you know that before?
I did. And that therapist told me what a gift it was for my mother to be able to give that to me, because she wasn't seeing this simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
My mother stopped seeing her and suggested her. And honestly, it was a very good suggestion, because when she decided to not change careers, but she decided to counsel geriatric patients, I had to find something new. And the person that was suggested to me just did not get it. It wasn't the same thing. And you can tell when a therapist gets it when you're explaining something to them and they suggest something and you're going, no, let me explain it to you again. You can feel it inside yourself when you know that's not the right course.
Right.
They're not right. And so I attempted to go to that person a couple of times until I realized it just wasn't working for me, and I stopped going. But the person that I had, that was my mother's, she was totally, yeah. I mean, I still think about things that she said to me and who she was. And when she was my therapist, when we had the life transition with your father passing away, and I was trying to figure out what to do with myself. And when I finally got my teacher credential and my master's, she was one of the first people I called after telling family.
Wow.
Because we talked about it, and I was no longer doing therapy with her, but I wanted her to know that what we talked about actually happened.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She had an impact on you.
Yeah. Yeah. And she was very
Yes.
gracious when she even called me back and all that and told me how happy she was that had happened. So I still think of her to this day, because I think she was really one of those people who really understood who she was talking to and really had methods that really worked for me at the time. And I actually started seeing her before your dad passed away. And and then of course afterwards, for sure. And then I had a therapist. This is crazy. I feel like it's a little disjointed, but we'll go back and forth in our histories. Then I had a therapist who was in that therapist's same office, who I had never met before, but I knew her name and I knew where she was and how I could get in touch with her. And when your father was having major difficulties towards the end of his life, I called her up, and all I did on the phone was cry. She sat on the phone with me, I don't know, for 30 minutes while I just cried, just from the depths of crying. And I'm sure she was saying something to me, but I just recall just crying while she was just there listening to that. And yeah, that was pretty amazing. That she was able to do that for me, because that's exactly what I needed. I just needed somebody outside my family to just hear my anguish, I guess, and to kind of just say I'm sure she said niceties to me throughout that, or asked me a few questions as to what was going on. But I just remember I was mostly just being over the telephone, which was not normal back then. This was the late 90s, and we didn't do telephone therapy. But I called her in a time of crisis, and I just started crying. And instead of her saying, "You need to come in," or "I don't do this over the phone," she just stayed on the phone.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've had my different experiences with a few therapists in my life. It would be wonderful if insurance would just see this as a necessary thing and let people have the freedom and not put 10 sessions on them, 20 sessions on them, whatever, and just let them go through the life process of having a therapist when they want to. And I do, I'm still in connection with a totally different therapist that I started going to. I've never met her. I know what she looks like. She knows what I look like, but we do only phone therapy. And I've been doing that with her since I got into this last relationship, because I was seriously changing my life up I was older and I was at the end of my 50s. And as much as I thought that, and I still do think that I can be open and all that, I wasn't necessarily ready for some of the things that were coming at me.
Yes.
Yeah. And not to disparage my partner, but it's just, a whole different thing. And I just needed somebody to help me through that. And she has done that mostly just by letting me talk. And yeah, pretty much. And that's why they call it talk therapy, because I really think that a therapist is very subtle in the way they navigate the road while you're talking. And maybe they don't talk very much, because I know there's a lot of comedy sketches about therapists who take all this money and all they've said is, how'd that make you feel? And I was afraid we'd go. But in actuality, they do put in things along the way, which you sort of subconsciously don't realize until after you've had the session. And then a week or two later, all of a sudden you're doing something different and you can't figure out exactly why you are doing it different. But it's because while you were on the phone with them, you were able to work it out by talking, and they're able to put certain things in along the way that give you more knowledge or speak to that emotion or illuminate you somehow.
Yeah.
It just sort of happens and you can't really put your finger on it.
Oh,
And that's the moment, right?
Yeah.
It
I mean,
just
that's such a
happens.
special, they're called golden nuggets, right? I mean,
Right.
yeah, I love my therapist because she does that too, where I've never met her either. I've only ever done what they call telehealth appointments. So it's a video chat. And I'll be in therapy and I'll be like, oh, I need to write that down. But then I don't want to leave the present moment of what we're talking about.
Right.
So I hardly ever write anything down, but she always does have a really great way of navigating what I'm going through and not just regurgitating things to me. It's such a insightful way to do therapy. And she also knows that I like to do yoga therapy or things that involve somatic awareness and somatic therapy. So she'll be like, okay, where are you feeling that in your body? Okay, or she'll be like, okay, what do you need today? Do you want to go through a little yoga session? And we'll just do it. She's on the computer and I'll just be laying on my floor or something. And she'll walk me through a little bit of a meditation. I mean, stuff like that. That's not for everybody, but for me, and sometimes I also feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, but I think there's this thing too. And I don't know if you experienced this, where, because you mentioned just crying on the phone to one of your therapists, where I have a really hard time crying in therapy. I do it. I pretty much cry in every session. I don't plan to. It just happens. But I also get super overwhelmed by crying in therapy, even though it's my space and my time, because I think to a certain extent, I'm also, I don't know, it's this weird thing that comes over me where I feel like I'm performing and I don't want to feel that way, but I feel like, oh, I gotta be put together. I have to elicit a certain type of myself for therapy instead of just being authentically me. Yeah. Or when you cry, oh my gosh, it's so vulnerable. And our society doesn't really allow for vulnerability, only in specific contexts, right? And even then, how do you erase all the built up stuff all the armor you've put on to just exist and walk through the world day to day? And then you have a 50-minute therapy session. You're supposed to just let go.
Unload. Yeah. I think when I was younger, I had a less of a deterrence for crying. But now that I'm older, and my therapist is younger than I am, I sort of feel like I need to hold that back. And sometimes I think she can tell in my voice that I'm upset. But I don't actually let it out until maybe after the session is over.
Yeah, definitely cry after too sometimes. Yeah,
right. So I know I do that, and maybe that's not the best thing, but I know what I'm doing, and so I feel like I'm in control of that. You want to come across as a person that is not that's therapy.
No, sorry,
necessarily need therapy. Because I would say,
yeah.
Because
I know, why is that?
Because we still have a thing about it, I don't go. I go. Also, I'm what they call maintenance now. I'm a once a monther.
Me too. Yay!
Yeah. because that's what she calls it as well, because I'm not in that state anymore, that I feel like I need to have it more frequently. I'm just dealing with whatever I want to talk about when that thing comes up, or if something has happened that I don't think I handled well, or I would like to help somebody else through something, then at least I have that.
Yep.
Right. And I have to say that it's really interesting what resistance is, and I'm going to say something here that, I don't know, I don't want to throw my partner under the bus or anything like that. I hope this doesn't offend them, but so my partner, my husband has a disability plaque. Placard. And I remember you and I were talking about the disability placard. And initially when I first met him, I didn't want to use that thing. It bothered me because he has CP. And so he's entitled to have the placard. And he has it in his car. He doesn't have a license plate. And he uses it very sparingly, because one time we were coming from our car to the movies and we were late and we were running. And I said, this is not a good thing for us to be hanging a disability placard in a disability spot as we run to the movie theater. But then I understand disabilities can be invisible.
Right.
Right? It's not necessarily a physical disability, right? Anyway, so I said something about how I didn't like it. And you said to me,
What did you say?
you said to me, well, if this helps him, or if he wants to use that, that's up to him to decide to use it. And in that moment, I felt so much resistance to the fact that you weren't agreeing with me. I could feel my body actually have the reaction of my body. Wasn't saying it up here, but my body was saying, WTF. I could feel the resistance.
You never let on.
No. And we went into Target, and the whole time we're in Target, we're talking about, in the back of my mind was this resistance that came over me. And then I realized 3 or 4 days later, I'm like, oh, you know what? The resistance was embarrassment that I was trying to control that situation. And she's absolutely right. If this is his deal, and if he feels he needs to use it on a certain occasion, then let him use it. And I realized, and then my affect went down and diminished, and the resistance went away. And I think that's what happens in therapy as well.
Yeah.
You're talking about something, and your therapist will say something, and you'll immediately want to sort out. Like,
Oh, I know.
that's not what
Keep
it.
defense over here. Yeah,
Right.
and a good therapist will notice it, and especially if you've had them for a while, they're like, "Oh, I can see that you're holding back something." And you're like, "Damn it!
Yeah.
Why did we do
Yeah.
video telehealth?" No, I'm kidding. I mean, they can also hear it in your voice, typically.
Sure.
So yeah,
Sure.
you're right. It is. It's about kind of trying to go into a sauna and just relax all the things you put up. Right. I think that's what therapy is for. In some ways.
Is. And I think that being able to identify what happened between the two of us, and you didn't know it, I was going through it all by myself.
Yeah.
And I had another friend who mentioned something also about, she works with people who are on social security disability, and helping them through the process and the things that they might need. And she has no judgment about that. It's like, if that's what they need, or if that's what works for them, then that's what works for them. And you shouldn't, well, she didn't say you shouldn't, but I was listening to the way she was talking about it. I was thinking, I shouldn't, as a partner, ever criticize my partner, whether they're able-bodied, disabled, whatever it is, on how they choose to make themselves comfortable in that moment, because that speaks more to me than it does to them. So going through, the reason I'm bringing this all up is because going to therapy allows you to realize in that moment, oh boy, I'm resisting something here. Why am I so tweaked right now? What's my problem? And I don't really call it defensiveness. It's more like, this is not my reality, and I don't want to accept the fact that there could be another reality, and then accepting it. But that's all because you've gone to therapy.
Yes.
or
Right.
you've worked on yourself without a therapist, which is possible
It's
as
possible.
well. Yeah,
Mhm.
and you become to realize the things that come up. Now the new word is triggers, but but this was different than a trigger because it wasn't my own personal experience with it. It
Yeah.
was me wanting not to be part of that experience. I didn't want to be
Yeah.
doing a certain thing because my partner was doing a certain thing.
I know it's so hard. You are with someone in a partnership and their choices or actions or just life experience or whoever they are as a person comes up against your own belief system or ways of navigating life.
It's their
It's tough.
experience. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
your
And
own
that's,
experience.
you can't argue with someone's experience. And
No.
I struggle with that all the time, right? Like,
Right.
I get so defensive. I'm like, well, you perceived it that way. Well, okay, that's effed up for me to say. If they perceived it that way, they perceived it that way. And if I came across that way to them, I came across that way to them. And I just have to hear them and move on. I have a hard time with that and I'm working on that. But to go back to therapy, so it's funny now, my current therapist is the one that I initially reached out to have as our couples therapist 5 years ago.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And then my partner and I took a break for about a year. And in that break, I was seeing that therapist and I was like, oh, well, I guess out of that situation, I was able to get a really great therapist. I've also, I don't know if you've experienced this, Mom, but one of my first therapists in adulthood after the EMDR experience, because I did that at 24, maybe 23, 24. Okay. So when I was around 26, I started therapy again. When I moved up to the Pacific Northwest, there was a counseling services program for LGBTQ folks. I forgot to go to a session, I think, and and then I just never went back, and it wasn't really a good click because the therapist gave me homework, and I was like, this doesn't really feel like you're getting me like papers, like a worksheet, which
Right.
I'm not against, but it didn't click. So then I went and found another place that a friend of mine had referred me to, and that was in person. Anyway, I had been matched to a non-binary Jewish therapist, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I would take the bus to my therapist, and I would get so anxious about what I was going to talk about that day that I almost didn't want to go to the therapy sessions at all. I just didn't know what would come up, right? And you can't plan. Sometimes you can have things you want to talk about, but
Right.
I was trying to control it sometimes. And I remember just pushing the button to the elevator, being like, oh God, I have to come up with a topic. I have to come up with a topic. Because I didn't know how to have space without talking either. I didn't know if I didn't have anything to say, what was going to happen. That made me anxious. And this person I was really excited actually to work with because they were Jewish and non-binary. And I was like, wow, that's cool. That's not usual. And so someone, you mentioned having someone that choosing a therapist. And I think that is important for some people. And for me, it was. But we had I think I'd been working with them for maybe about half a year, maybe almost a year. And then I just got ghosted. And I don't know what happened, if it was the service agency that was working with this therapist, or I know that they were going to school at the same time and finishing up their student therapy, all of that. And that's why I was able to go, because it was $50 a session or something really cheap. And anyway, it kind of ruined my experience with therapy for quite a while. I was kind of traumatized after that because I felt like I was really making progress, quote unquote, by going to therapy and doing the hard thing. I started to get more comfortable with it. And by the time I got more comfortable with it and had established this relationship with this therapist, it ended, unbeknownst to me. And so it took me a long time to kind of get back into wanting to go to a therapist again. And then you mentioned insurance not covering therapy. And so I was really adamant that I wanted the therapist to be out of network or to not be tied up in insurance, because I knew that I was probably, this is 2019, 2020, and I had just been laid off in 2019. I was like, I don't know, I don't want to get laid off again and not have my therapist, not have access to that person just because of my insurance coverage being over. And so, of course, I got laid off 3 more times after that. So I'm glad that I did that. I had what is the word? I had an idea about the future, I guess.
Yeah. Premonition.
And a premonition.
Not
Yeah.
premonition, no, whatever.
Someone tell us what the word is. Jeez.
Better not call in right now. You people don't understand vocabulary.
Well, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, but now I'm happy with the therapist I have, and I'm glad that I've been seeing her for so long. I remember when I lived in Arizona, I was seeing an acupuncturist, and I loved seeing the acupuncturist. And I don't know, he was a good person, and I really appreciated his sensibility. And I have dermatillomania. I would go in, and it was solo. They have community acupuncture or private acupuncture, and I was able to afford the private because it was cheaper back then in the I don't know, like 2012. Anyway, but he noticed that my whole back was just scabby.
Mhm.
And he was concerned because I could tell he was concerned. He was like, I have this person that I would recommend. They do EMDR therapy, and I think it could really help you. And he gave me his card. And I remember at the time it was something around $100 a session. And I was like, I think it was the summer after I had first started teaching. I was like, how am I going to afford this? But I went and I did 4 sessions, and I was like, huh, it was really interesting, the EMDR. I recommend doing it. I would like to do it again. I don't know if it was super helpful, but I also don't write it off either. So
Right.
I do appreciate people like that, adults in my life when I was a young adult, helping to get me resources to things, because I think that's what it takes, this community, helping you get the things you need. And we don't have that in our society. It's not built in. It's not like, yes, every year you should go get an MRI and you should go get a colonoscopy. And it's not, none of it's preventative.
No.
It's all after the fact. And I think that's what's so frustrating about living in the United States, is that therapy is not a given. It's also not considered important. But really, if we know anything, we know mental health and physical health kind of go hand in hand, or not kind of, they do.
Mhm.
So, and I'm more in Western medicine, doctors are noticing that and really putting forth that notion as well. But it's so frustrating. I wish that we lived in a culture where you go to therapy and it's accessible, and you know where to find it, and you know how to have access to these things. But we don't. So we have to figure it out ourselves.
Well, that's because we've had a culture of strength. If something's wrong with you if you're not strong.
Or is it stealth?
That or stoicism.
Yeah,
You know.
stoicism.
Yeah, I don't know, but I know that it's considered weakness. I mean, look, we couldn't say the word cancer. When somebody had cancer, they were blacklisted. If they were a celebrity, for sure, they didn't get any work. I mean, why do we ever? Nobody is in control of things that happen to them like that.
Right.
You know, there's not one particular thing that person did to get cancer, right?
Right.
So I don't understand why we couldn't. From a very early time, we've been sort of trying to hide things under the carpet for a very long time. We do it professionally. We do it within our families, right? We do it in our relationships. And so now it's getting better when a lot of celebrities and athletes, men especially, are coming out and saying they've gone to therapy. They're going to therapy. It's become something that is part of their life. I think that's super productive. It's unfortunate that it's taken so long to be able to just have commercials about it and have people speak up about it, and people on TV are not too shy to talk about it, and they feel stronger about it. I was raised in a family where talking about your feelings was a big deal. I mean, we just did it. It was natural, right? When I say big deal, I should have probably said it wasn't a big deal. In other words, we did it so much that it didn't feel like anything, especially having a mother that I had. That's what she wanted to do. And she was good at doing her own sort of mommy therapy on me and on the rest of us. And so I feel like she made it super easy to talk to her about things. I remember going to therapy in my 30s when my therapist said to me, "You don't have to tell your mother everything." And I was like, what? Because I'd been telling my mother everything, right? And then I realized probably that wasn't a good idea, because she wasn't always going to be in my corner. When I got older as an adult, she may have not felt the same way as she did when I was younger. So I had to learn how to do that with pretty much everybody in my life. I was very much of an open book. So because that was the environment in which I was raised in. And so I thought everybody else was like that. And I started to realize as I got older that people clam up a lot more, and I probably should start clamming up too. And then as I got further into my career, people would start noticing that I wasn't, when we had downtime in the teacher's lounge and stuff like that, I wouldn't share as much as I did before. And that's because younger people are sharing the things that what are you going to tell them? Right. I got to the point where I thought that me saying anything to them was not going to satisfy me, and it wasn't going to satisfy them. You could just tell. So I just sort of started keeping things more to myself and listening a lot. And if I thought it was important for me to say something from my own experience, I would. But it became further and further from the truth when I left, or I wasn't talking as much because there were a lot of other people talking. So me adding to that didn't seem like anything that was worth it. And because I was raised up differently than a lot of the people that I have worked with and grown up with, they didn't often understand my intonation, playful sarcasm, that kind of stuff.
Oh my God.
And
Yeah.
so I decided that instead of pissing somebody off or them construing me in the wrong way, I would just dial it back. But I think therapy has helped with that because I don't really need, I mean, it seems ironic because here we are on a podcast, but I don't really need to talk a lot to a lot of people all the time. I just don't do that as much as I used to.
Yeah.
Right.
And I have an idea for a podcast called The Teacher's Lounge. Should just go into different teachers' lounges.
It is pretty amazing. It is interesting. Yeah. I have to say, there is a pretty interesting dynamic in a teacher's lounge. Good, bad, and different. It changes all the time. Right. So I think that the fact that we're talking more about it and it's not this horrible thing that it was before, and that's good. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to feel that way, but at least the people that I'm around feel that way, and that makes me feel more comfortable. And I don't have to censure myself because I, go to therapy. I'm willing to talk about it, even to people who may not agree with me on that. I think that sometimes the more vulnerable, I feel like vulnerability can be strength.
Absolutely. I think so too. And I try to tell myself that as well.
And other people may not believe that all the time, but I think that if it comes to shove later on, it may plant a seed. And that's kind of sort of how I feel. And I think that's what therapists do too. They plant seeds.
Yes.
And that's why you'll all of a sudden have this moment where your resistance goes away, or you'll have it may be an aha moment, or it may just be something, and all of a sudden you can't explain that something takes over in you and you become more comfortable. Whereas now the thing that you were not able to be comfortable with before.
Yeah. And I think also, I don't know how to talk about this necessarily, but therapists, they're not your friends. They're not family members. I don't even know if they are community members, but it's this really interesting dynamic where you have someone else in your life that knows so much about you and all your personal shit and all the stuff that you can say that if you're feeling you're not in a great mood, or because I'll be like, oh, I want to talk about this. And then I'll start talking about it. And then I'll be like, oh, I'm going to sound like this. And my therapist's like, whatever, just talk about it. And so you can kind of really let your hair down and not, obviously I'm not saying like harmful things in there, but I can say things that I wouldn't say on right now.
Absolutely.
But I don't, basically she's allowing me not to have filters. And I think that's important for therapy. But it's so interesting because, I think it's hard to classify what a therapist is in your life, because I think for me, it's really nice to have someone that's like on the outside, like you said earlier, that someone who knows me, but doesn't know me and isn't a part of my life, my friends and my family and my partner, things like that.
Well, because they're not embroiled.
They're not embroiled. They have bias towards me because we've been in therapy for 5 years. And so they're going to take probably my side. But that's you don't necessarily want your therapist to always take your side. You want them to be like, well, could you have done that differently? Of course. But it's so interesting to me too, because I've never had a therapy relationship last as long as this one has. And so I feel attached, to this person in some way, because they've watched me basically go through. I also started seeing them when I was going initially through my breakup, and I was just crying also through sessions, just really crying. And then from a weekly basis to then a bi-weekly to a monthly, but they've seen me go through all my layoffs. all of the good, bad, and the ugly, all of it. And so I just was a really interesting relationship where it's like, it's so personal, but yet I've never met them in person, and they're not obviously a friend, and they're not a close community. It's just interesting, the dynamics with therapy.
Well,
And
I ran into one of my therapists once.
okay, I have done that too. Tell me your story.
It's odd.
I know, it is.
Because you don't want to see them other than in that office. So this is when I was seeing somebody in person. And then you don't want to see them. And all of a sudden we wound up at the same park together, and they were walking their dog. And I'm like, and then we had a conversation.
You have a life.
Yeah, well, I realize they do.
Yeah, of course.
It's just that you don't want to run into them because it's awkward.
The veil is lifted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the fourth wall in theater. Oh, and talk to the audience, please. Unless it's necessary, but or it's go to the script. I'm like, at first I didn't recognize them.
Yeah.
And
out of context.
Right. I'm like, well, it's kind of like when kids see me out of the classroom. Or when I see my kindergarten teacher out of the classroom, I was poor.
Yeah. You're only supposed to be in the classroom.
Right. So, yeah, so it's out of context. So I didn't like that. But you mentioned something earlier about trying to craft a topic. And so what I usually do before I talk with my therapist is I have a book and I write things into my book. And if we didn't get to it, like I'll write, it's kind of like going to the regular doctor. These are things I'm going to talk about with the doctor about.
Yeah.
So I write things down that I want to touch on if possible. And if I don't get to them, then I put an arrow for the next session. But sometimes I just write and circle, do not talk about this.
Really?
Because sometimes I have spent too much time talking about something that really should not, I need to move on. I can come back to it eventually, but I need to remember that I need to talk about something that's more beneficial to me.
Yeah. Okay, but then do you also do things like, yeah, it does make sense. And I'm wondering too. So sometimes in therapy, I absolutely don't want to talk about this. And it's because I'm either don't want my therapist to know that part about my life, or I'm embarrassed by it, or I need to process it more before I bring it up.
Right.
Or it's also on the flip side of that, what can I talk about that's about me? Because it's me time in therapy, but also a lot of therapy is about relationships.
Right.
And do you spend your time talking about a friendship?
Your mother.
Your mother, my daddy issues. I mean, I talk about my dad a lot, obviously. But obviously I talk a lot about my relationship with my partner and how do I communicate better, all those things. But a lot of times friendships will come up too, where it's like, this person hurt me or this person ghosted me and it makes me feel really shitty. But then it's also how much do you dwell on, or not dwell, it can get in the gray area of like, I want to talk about my shit and not everyone else's. Do you know what I mean?
No, I do know what you mean. I'm just thinking.
But everyone else's shit gets you. Anyway,
well, that's true. I mean, you talk the full gamut in therapy. You talk about all of it. But when I was learning to navigate my relationship with my husband, after not being in a relationship for 2 decades, like this, and I would find myself talking about that every session. Right. And I'm like, okay. So I would write, do not talk about your relationship. But let's talk about other things. That the fact that I had retired and how did that make me feel just recently and stuff like that, or other kinds of things. Okay. Right? So sometimes you have to put the brakes on. You have to allow certain things that you've learned in therapy to process over time. And talking about it, whether it's week to week, bi-weekly, whatever it is, month to month, sometimes it's a little much. And you just have to allow yourself to do the work that you've been sort of led to and see if it works out. I think for me, the more therapy I go to over the years of its cumulative effect, I think, it really makes me understand how you need to really focus on yourself as an individual and how you are going to react to things or not react to things. And that leads to a lot less criticism and judgment. My whole life has been spent really giving myself up to other people And I don't want that to sound like, oh, yeah, she's so, no, that's not what I mean. For some reason, I was born to look outside of myself in terms of caring and spending time with people and putting myself maybe not necessarily as the focus or in a comfortable position to make somebody else feel better. And I think as I've gotten older, I'm learning how to balance that better.
You want to reclaim yourself more.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And when you do that, and I actually have to say to myself, hey, don't do that because it's about you. It's gonna be about you right now. Right? Let it be just about you. You right now. And not in a egotistical way, but in a way that pulls you away from getting involved in something with somebody else that's really not your thing. Not your issue. That's not your thing, that's not your issue. Let them do what they're gonna do. You concentrate on Debbie. I guess that would be the better word. Concentrate on Debbie. Concentrate on Debbie.
Concentrate on Debbie.
Which I think is what I've learned through therapy. I had a therapist who said to me, the one that I went to work with geriatric patients, I had this really big problem with the word selfish. And she said, selfish is a positive word. It's okay to focus in on yourself. There's different kinds of selfishness. We're not talking about that pathological selfishness. We're not talking about selfishness that's mean-spirited. We're talking about how you can focus on yourself and still maintain relationships in positive ways while doing that. And that was a huge...
What?
It was. Yeah, I also had a moment in therapy. I don't know if anybody else has had this before. I think about it because it comes up periodically. When she told me something about my level of responsibility, and I started to laugh and cry at the same time.
Oh, I've had that experience.
Have you? I mean, I couldn't control it even. And I'm just sitting here watching this. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. But I think because the crying was the realization that I've been carrying this load that I didn't have to carry for such a long time.
Oh my God.
And the laughing was that now I was absolved of that.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I had a similar experience where in the therapy, and the person that ghosted me, we were talking about, I don't know, all the ways I was showing up in the world or something. And I was around 27, maybe. I think I was at that age. And they just looked at me and said, oh, you were just trying to be the good girl or something like that, where it was just trying to play the role of good child, good girl, good woman, all of these things. And I was just like, oh, and I just started crying. And I was just like, I mean, I wasn't laughing at that point, but I was just like, whoa, holy shit, you kind of nailed everything right there. And I'm having to sit here experiencing this moment of an epiphany with you. And it just gets you right in the chest or wherever you experience emotions. Yeah, it's just like, what? Yeah, but I've had a lot of instances too of just crying or laughing because I'm uncomfortable. Also, I've had experiences of being in a meditation. This is back in college where it was a 2-day meditation retreat. And halfway through it, I just started cracking up. And I was like, what is happening? I'm trying to suppress it because everyone's meditating around me. They're relaxed and I'm over here laughing. And I asked later, is that okay? I asked to the instructor and it was like, yeah, just laugh if you need to laugh. And I was like, I don't want to disturb anyone. They're like, whatever, you're supposed to meditate. You're supposed to not let things distract you or something. But I was just like, well, laughter, things come up in laughter.
Oh, yeah.
It's meaningful. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the Mary Tyler Moore episode with the clown who passes away?
I don't, probably, but I can't recall it right now.
You need to go find that episode. You'll know exactly what the inappropriateness, or you might say appropriateness, of when to laugh and when to cry.
Yeah.
And that episode totally nails it. Yeah.
Here's another thing about me, and this is where I'm pivoting off a little bit, but I used to laugh when people got injured. And it wasn't a maniacal laugh. It was just, I'm uncomfortable and how do I deal with discomfort? And sometimes it wasn't even a controlled thing. It would just happen. And then it would become really obnoxious. and even more uncontrollable. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm laughing when someone's hurt. But I think it was my way to somehow my body was like, you need to depressure whatever's going on and relax yourself or something so that you can focus. I don't know, but it would take me away from being able to help somebody. And that got really annoying and old after a while, especially when it was with my partner and stuff. And this was many years ago now, and I don't do that as much. It still happens. But why does laughter come up? It's such an interesting thing because it can be innocuous, but it can also be kind of like, oh, you should probably look under the engine there and see why you're laughing when someone's hurt or just generally.
I think it's a defense mechanism to protect yourself.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't beat yourself up over these things because obviously we have these emotions for a reason. And sometimes we know where to put them, and sometimes we don't.
You don't. Yeah. Yeah. And we're just humans trying to navigate an emotional landscape.
That's why we have therapy.
Yeah, that's why we have therapy. And I highly recommend it. I think everyone should be in therapy, whether you're in it for a short time or a long time. I don't think there's ever, I mean, you mentioned a maintenance phase, which that's fine, but there doesn't have to be an end. You don't.
No. My just calls it that. She calls it maintenance. When someone just maintenance is what she called it.
I like it because it's a lot of tools. You just get a lot of tools dealing with things in your life. And I think otherwise you don't get that. I mean, you can do a Google search, you can do your own research, but it's not really the same. I don't think.
Well, I think being able to talk to somebody, like you said, we said earlier, that's not emotionally connected to anybody in your experience.
Right.
Is very freeing because they're not, they're whatever they say after the therapy session is over is what they say. But they try to be non-judgmental during a therapy session as much as possible.
Yeah.
Right. And so, going into it, it should be a safe place to have a sounding board for your emotions.
Yeah.
And I think that I would like to see more people avail themselves of that. I would also like to see that our medical community, well, not the community itself, but the systems in place like insurance, understand that this is a necessity and give it a little bit more ease on how to be able to go and afford sessions. And also, we also need more therapists. That's also a problem. There's a scarcity of that in many medical.
And I would totally go and be a therapist and go to schooling, but because it costs so much, it's puts up barriers in the U.S. So
I also want to say that besides just going to trained therapists, if you know somebody, if you're attached to a congregational life, that's another place to go. I go to grief counseling, assistant who's with a denomination that I'm involved with, and that can be good too because they are trained in what we call pastoral care, whether they're a rabbi or a minister or whatever they are. And so they do have ways, and that can be very helpful too, especially if you're going within a group, because you can hear how other people are handling those life events. Yeah.
See, I thought it would be cool to be I hate this word and I wish there was a better word, but life coach. I really connect with helping people in that way.
What?
But I think it's gotten really skeezy over the past several years. And so I never went further with that, but you can get your life coaching certificate or something, which I've always kind of been interested in getting.
But that's the same as any kind of career choice, because there are good therapists and there are not so good therapists. Well, who you click with is who you click with.
That's true. Yeah, maybe there's a way to not do it in a bad way.
Well, hopefully in any kind of occupation like this, there's a way to do it.
That's true. I know.
But that's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about the successes that we've experienced in therapy.
And I urge you to go find a therapist near you. We'd love to hear from you. Send in your complaints and maybe they'll be featured on the show. On some platforms, you can even leave a voice message, and you can also leave a typed message in the Q&A box on other platforms. So please reach out to us if you want advice, if you have questions. We have episodes out twice monthly,